discussing how contractors can finish strong and finish well when they decide to exit their business. This is the Contractor Succession Podcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Contractor Succession Podcast, where our focus is on helping contractors finish strong and finish well when they decide to exit their business. So, if you're looking on video, you'll see three folks there. You'll see Scott Good, you see Doug Janowski, and you'll see Ted Lape. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us on the show. We appreciate it.
Great to be here.
Thank you for having us, Marty.
Well, as you can see, Scott Good is my partner in Contractor Succession, and he is the co-host of the show. Ted and Doug are with the company called Lazear Capital Partners, L-A-Z-E-A-R, Lazear Capital Partners. And one of you is in Ohio, I believe, and the other one is in Texas. And brief introduction, because I really want to focus on ESOPs, but brief introduction. So Ted Lape, and his last name is spelled L-A-P-E, L-A-P-E. He is a partner in Lazear Capital Partners, and he has helped numerous companies determine the right answer for their succession and liquidity needs, whether that was an ESOP or another solution. And we are going to talk about different things like that. If the decision is made to sell the company to an ESOP, Ted excels at helping sellers understand the process fully. And that's what we're going to do today, hopefully. Our other guest with Lazear Capital Partners is Doug Janowski, and he's a managing director. And Doug is a managing director with Lazear Capital Partners, and he is in Dallas. And focusing on primarily on the Texas region. So, Doug, we met a few months ago through another connection. I think this all started with Denise Logan, right?
It did. One of my favorite people.
We love Denise Logan. She's been awesome.
I'm
all
actually
good
having
things
dinner
start
with her
with
tomorrow
Denise
night.
Logan.
She's in Dallas, Marty.
Yeah. So, all right. So let's start this way, Ted. We're going to start with the fundamentals. So we're going to talk about ESOPs. So maybe we should start by defining what that is. Okay, Ted, tell me.
In its simplest form, an ESOP is an employee stock ownership plan. Sometimes people will say employee stock option plan, but no, it's employee stock ownership plan. And essentially, it's a retirement plan. It's like a trust. It's a trust set up for the benefit of the employees. And it's sort of like a 401k, but instead of having Apple and IBM stock in it, it's got the stock of the employer in it. And that stock's going to go out into the accounts of all the people, and they're going to end up owning the company. That's the basics of it. And then and because the government wants you to do this, there's all sorts of tax savings and other stuff that I'm sure we'll get into, that where they're going to incent you to go ahead and do this thing.
Yeah. So Doug. I'm going to bounce over to you, and you feel a lot of calls from folks, probably some strange calls, because they think they want an ESOP. But what are some of the calls that you're getting from people who say, "Hey, I think I want to do an ESOP"? Talk to us about some calls you're getting from people.
Yeah, I think, Marty, it's a good question. Down in this particular part of the country, I don't think there's been as many advocates and advisors like there are, Ted, and the folks up in Ohio, Pennsylvania, the West Coast. So my role has been, overwhelmingly educating and advising on what these are, what they can do, where they fit, where they don't fit. I was just at not a GC, but a CG event 2 weeks ago, and had a partner at a CPA firm who said, tell me about ESOPs because I've seen them in the past. Where do they not work? And asked me to go ahead and define some of those. And when I shared with her, these are scenarios where they don't work, she said, that's the right answer. I've seen people do these, and not do them that way. And so she said, let's set up a meeting and talk about this and get people in this area to understand it better. It's another option that is just not as well known or looked at in this part of the country.
Yeah. So let's also quickly get into the meat of things. And so some people may have looked into this, some people have not looked into this. So, Ted, coming back to you, and Scott, be ready because after he answers, I'm going to ask you to kind of take over. So, be ready. Um, Ted, advantages and disadvantages. Now, that will probably take 2 days, but kind of summarize what you see as the advantages and disadvantages of doing
Yeah,
using an ESOP.
especially vis-a-vis, a contractor. Um, so the advantages are that you get a very fair and full value. People are surprised to hear this, but you get at least as much as you're going to get selling to your competitor, typically. And
Hmm.
then on top of that, you don't get all your money at close. So you're going to get an additional, say, 30% in interest because you didn't get all your money up front. Um, there is a way you can sell tax free that would take a while to explain. The company typically is going to become tax free after you do it. So those are two different tax frees. The one is personal to the seller selling tax free, the other is the company becoming tax free. The owner gets to keep running it. Um, there's not some committee of the employees that's running the company. Usually the seller continues to run it or designates who's going to run it. It's a much easier, more confidential sale.
Hmm.
Your competitors aren't going to find out. Your people aren't going to find out. Um, so those are, and there's some other tax benefits as well that we can get into. Those are some of the big ones. There's no escrows. There's no earnouts. You know you're going to get your money. It's a friendlier sale. All that kind of stuff. It
Hmm.
takes about 4 months. Um, the disadvantages are typically you get less money up front. Now, contractors, when they sell, unless they have a huge service business, typically don't get all their money up front anyway. But you get more if you sell to a third party up front. So, if people want to get more money up front, sometimes they'll say, "Hey, I'd rather do that."
Mm.
The other thing is you have to have management to run an ESOP after you sell. So if your plan is to run off to Florida and be done, um, you know, then an ESOP may not be the right answer for you.
Yeah.
Or if you don't have a decent management team, you don't have to have identified your successor yet. The ESOP gives you all sorts of ammunition to do that. But those are the two primary ones. There's ones that people think are negatives that really aren't. Um,
Mm.
but but those are the two big ones. And from the contractor perspective, uh, you know, 20 years ago, only 4% of people sold to ESOPs. Last year, I believe the statistic was 25% of contractors did.
Wow.
And I think that's because the other 75% don't know what the heck an ESOP is. But you know,
Yeah. Well, business is going to boom after this because this is going worldwide. After this
exactly.
interview. You know, Scott, you must have some burning questions to ask these guys.
Yeah, I
Go.
already got a handful of things written down. I'm kind of jotting as you guys are talking. Um, Ted, you mentioned the management structure, or at least talked about the management. If you are working with a contracting business that is interested in doing an ESOP, but may not have the structure to support it if the owner does start to pull away. How do you guys handle that? Do you coach or do you look outside for people? Do you have folks that you partner up with, or how do you handle that?
Well, typically, what happens is whatever they have management wise is working right now, right?
Hmm.
And they know that if they want to leave in 3 or 5 years, typically they say, "Hey, I'd like to get out in 3 years, 5 years, 10 years." Sometimes they want to stay forever. But if they're going to leave in 3 to 5 years, they know they need to go find someone as their replacement. Usually, they think they can do that on their own. So we do a lot where maybe they're maybe there's two owners, and one of them's more like Mr. Inside, COO, CFO, and one's more Mr. Outside, doing the jobs and selling and whatever. So they start planning on who's going to take over those roles, or maybe one's older than the other, so they're really only looking at replacing one of the two. But most of the time, they think they can do that on their own. Now, I think it it's smart to get an outside party that can help groom that next generation, and they can come in and kind of consult with you. But most people just go kind of do it on their own.
Okay. Is there a particular size of business that, in other words, does the company need to have a certain revenue to be able to substantiate, number one, the way the 401k is set up to be able to make it worthwhile for the employees, and also to be able to pay the fees along the way to be able to manage it? Do you guys I guess it's a two-part question. Is there a kind of standard rule of thumb in the industry, and is there a standard rule of thumb for Lazier Capital?
I don't know if you want me to answer that or Doug.
Yeah, Doug, why don't you take that one?
Yeah, I mean, I can speak for Lazier that one of the things we want to do is we want to, these can be very sophisticated transactions where there's a lot of opportunities for the owners when it comes to tax planning, estate planning. We want to be able to pull and utilize all those various tools as best we can. So we're going to look for something a little bit more large on the larger side, sophistication. So I would say a good rule of thumb would be 2 million in EBITDA or above.
Okay.
Depending upon the opportunity, it could go 1.5 million. But when you start getting down into smaller than that, there are people who will do these, but it becomes more of an administrative process, and it is truly a strategic exit where you're taking advantage of all the things that you could have. So, Ted, is that a fair?
Yeah, I'd say 2 million of EBITDA. If you're out there and you're not a finance person, EBITDA is just earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, amortization, sort of like net income plus depreciation and taxes, interest. And then also, it's good to have at least 20 employees. You don't have to, but it just makes everything work a little better if you got 20 or more employees.
Yeah. What else, Scott?
Yeah. Is there a kind of a return for the employees? Does it start really making sense for them at a certain point? Obviously, there's if putting money into a 401k is great, but it's at what point does it really become advantageous for them?
Well, it's free to the employees.
Right.
So I guess day one.
Okay,
um,
that's a good answer.
but typically there is a vesting period, kind of like a 401k match, which is like a 6-year vesting period.
Okay.
So 0% the first year, 20% vested the second, 40, 60, 80, 100.
Hmm.
So I guess if you start getting vested after the second year, that's when it would start mattering to the employee. And obviously, if you can stay at least 6 and get vested, that's better.
Hmm.
So the longer you stay, the more stock you get, the more you're vested, and the more return you're going to see.
So let me jump in. So Doug, obviously it's a retirement. Employees want to, assuming you've talked to the employees and they quote unquote want to do this and this is going to happen. Other than money, uh, what would be of interest to the owner? Is there advantages other than the financial rewards, which are good for both parties? But talk to me about that.
Yeah, and this goes back to our common friend Denise Logan and why I just enjoy getting to talk to her so much about the EQ side of the owners. There is a significant benefit to the owners and the employees and employee ownership. The leading academic university, or one of the top leadings, is Rutgers University. They've done study upon study about how employee-owned businesses have fared from productivity. There's an immediate uptick in productivity. There's an immediate uptick in retention. They went out and looked at COVID, who fared better, employee-owned businesses or non-employee-owned businesses. Take a guess which one did far better. So there's all these subjective components to it. But what I've noticed, and this is just in talking to owners, Ted, tell me if you agree or not, but there is something markedly different in talking to owners after the disruption in 2020. Now obviously around the country, 9/11 obviously impacted Pennsylvania, New York, et cetera. But when you get to the Texas, southern areas, it was a financial crisis. 2000 was a financial crisis, a little bit in 2012. Those were cut budgets, all hands on deck. Let's keep the business going. 2020 was something different. It was just different. These are a lot of 60-year-old owners who saw their employees go above and beyond. They were putting stickers on the floor. They were buying plexiglass. They were chasing down masks. They were dealing with supply chain, PPP. there was just for some owners a complete difference. And I might not have this business today if it hadn't been for these people. And
Right.
you can hear that in their voice. You can hear we get to work with some amazing owners. Ted's heard me, some of these quotes from these owners are amazing about their not only do they want a fair market value for their business as they should. We're not, that is to Ted's point, they're going to get above or beyond a third party, especially with contractors, but they are really tied to the legacy and the employees. And it's a pretty much the Exit Planning Institute has a statistic that 75% of owners who sell to a third outside party profoundly, that's their word, profoundly regret it within 1 year.
Mm,
Profoundly, 73 quarters. And in this scenario, and you guys have probably met them, there's a lot of these people who truly enjoy going to work. They want to downshift. They want to take some money off the table. They want to begin diversifying, but they also want to start handing it on to that next generation of management. And to Ted's point, you can take
yeah.
6, 7 years. You can attract that 40-year-old talent that's so hard to find in the contractor world right now.
Yeah.
Employee-owned businesses are going to do that. So, sorry, Marty, I long
No, no.
answer to a short
No.
question.
Good answer. Good answer. So Ted,
Marty, I did want to correct one thing though.
Yep.
You said that they go to their employees and talk about it and decide to do it. That's not how it works.
right.
They decide to do
Thank you.
it, and then they
They decide to do it.
they
Correct.
do the ESOP, and then they tell the employees.
Yeah.
Got it.
And
Because
these,
it's free to the employees. We've never had an employee go, I don't want this free stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I asked the question and I knew that. I just asked a bad question.
Okay.
yeah,
So Ted, let's start going into the mechanics of it. So someone's listening to this. First of all, they can go to laziercapital.com. That's correct, right? Your
Uh-huh.
website,
Yep.
laziercapital.com. There are resources, there's papers, there's other interviews in there that you can learn. You can see Doug and Ted listed there. But let's start getting in the mechanics. Somebody's listening to this. And you've told them there's some minimums, should be around 20, should be about 2 million in EBITDA. What are some of the mechanics? So where would they start going down this road?
That,
Ted.
that's a great. So we tried all sorts of stuff over the years, and what we've sort of evolved to that works the best is we just start out with a conversation. What are your hopes? What are your dreams? We tell them a little bit about how ESOPs work, advantages, disadvantages, and just have a conversation. And usually we can tell pretty quickly whether it makes sense or not, at least in our minds. Obviously it's up to them whether it makes sense for them. And we can
Right.
kind of tell them, here's why it might make sense or it might not. And then if they think it might make sense, then we'll go ahead and have a second meeting where we do like an introduction to ESOPs, where we have charts and graphs, and it's a presentation that's designed for the owner. All
Mhm.
the stuff they care about. What's in it for me? What's in it for my employees, my key employees? What are the tax savings? How's this whole thing work? How do I get my money? When do I get my money? All that kind
Right.
of stuff. Um,
Yeah.
and then after that, if they're still interested, we'll do what's called a feasibility analysis, where we'll go out and we do it for free for people that are serious. And this is, it takes us 4 weeks and a lot of work. But we'll tell them, okay, here's the numbers you can count on. Here's what the sale price, here's what you get at closure, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the extra interest, the tax savings. Here's what it's worth to your people. Here's the special management incentive for your key people, and we just lay it all out there so they know how it's going to work, and then they can make a decision whether to go forward or not. And
Mm.
the costs are in there as well, which good news in an ESOP are typically not paid by the seller.
Yeah.
So it's all in there.
Right. Uh, Doug, anything to add to that about first steps, or you pretty much?
yeah. So, and Ted's heard me say this, and I'm sorry, I'll go off to the subjective side of things. We talked to an owner. I think this was, they kind of run it, but it was a week or two ago, and he said he's gotten over 20 offers in the last year. There are a lot of third parties out there in these popular industries, and they'll kind of throw out two things you hear over and over again: multiple valuation, multiple valuation. And I often like to think, boy, that's got to be a really easy thing to do, right? You just throw it out there and see if it sticks. With an ESOP, to Ted's point, the owner is getting to evaluate the entire structure, all the different ways to put this together. And so we have to slow it down a little bit because there's more thought that has to go into how you want to address some of these things. So
Hmm.
to Ted's point, we don't just jump from that first conversation where we feel like we can hear, this is, we had one the other day and one of our partners said he's an ESOP and doesn't know it yet. I mean, everything he's saying is I want to retain my people, I want to
Right.
stay involved, etc.
Right.
Um, but we have to slow it down even further so that they can truly understand there's a lot more freedom and flexibility in this structure, which sometimes can make it a little bit where we have to kind of take those few hours to go through it then before we
Yeah.
get into feasibility. So
Makes sense. Yeah, makes sense. Scott, we've often we've talked to some people, and what a recurring theme is. We heard whether it's accurate. I guess we'll ask Ted this, but Scott, maybe you can ask this question. But the whole tax advantages, right? We've heard people talk about that, right, Scott?
Yeah, it's come up a lot in conversations, and people sometimes try to wrap their head around it and can't make the leap from what they're used to seeing and how a business transaction is done versus how this looks to them. Because a lot of people, quite honestly, will look and say, "Oh, the fees are expensive. It's not worth me doing that," or the management stuff, but they don't see the back end, which is the tax savings and the advantages both to them as a seller and to the company itself going forward. So maybe you can talk about that a little bit.
Ted.
Yeah. So if you, at the most basic level, whether you're an LLC, a C corp, or an S corp currently, you'll transition typically to an S corporation, and you could sell any percentage you want to an ESOP, but there's math reasons why 100% is the best, and most people do that. So if you're 100% S corp ESOP, an S corp is a flow through, right? So currently the owner will put that on his personal tax return or her personal tax return. Well, with an ESOP, it's a retirement plan. So when it takes those taxes and puts it on its return, it doesn't pay federal or state tax, state in most states. It doesn't pay federal in any state, but in almost all states, it doesn't pay state tax either. So you have a tax free company. Okay. And that's pretty powerful because President Biden has talked about raising the income taxes and limiting the qualified business income deduction to where you're talking over 40% and sometimes over 50% income taxes. And then on the capital gains side, there is the ability to sell tax free, and they're looking at raising the federal to 26.5%, and then you got state on top of that, and then they're talking about Obamacare 3.8% on top of that. So you're in the 30s, 40s, depending on your state, percent for capital gains, and you get to avoid that. Now, on the cost, two things. One, again, the seller doesn't pay the cost. But two, there's often a pre closing deduction that we do that can be quite large. And that all goes to the seller, and often that's as big or bigger than whatever the closing costs are. So the owner gets a tax advantage that uh, is large, and then they don't have to pay the closing costs.
Yeah. Good. So maybe this is a delicate question, or I'll try to phrase it in a positive way. There are a lot of folks that we've talked to. Some of them say, "Well, I took this ESOP idea and I took it to my CPA, and the CPA said, no, that won't work for me." Oh, as Ted laughs, as Doug laughs. So how do I ask this question? I think maybe I'll make a statement that certainly listen to your CPA, certainly pay attention to them, but am I okay encouraging them if they listen to the show and they say, I still might be a candidate. I love my CPA. I want to keep him forever. But should they still contact you for more information? Is that a legitimate question, Ted?
Well, they absolutely, obviously, should do that. So what you have to realize about CPAs is not all CPAs have the same level of knowledge, right? And unfortunately, in the professional world, whether you're a CPA or an attorney or a banker or an insurance person or whatever, if people don't understand something, they always tell their client don't do it because they don't want to look like they don't know something. Or the one I love is Oh, I knew one ESOP, 40 years ago, and it had trouble. Well, I mean, how many non-ESOPs do you know, and did any of them have trouble? I mean, I don't even get that cut.
Yeah, because every other transition goes so darn well,
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
right?
well,
No other businesses
oh well,
have problems but that one ESOP in 1982. Uh,
right. So
but
I
Yeah.
don't even know how to respond to that because it's what are you talking about?
Well,
But
Yeah.
if I can add Ted to that too, because you know that a lot of my role has been going around to the CPA firms. That was for 15 years. I worked with all these CPAs, and I will tell you they're extremely interested in these. They've had me going around office to office, meeting with a number. I have a whole list of them that I got to get to. You don't do that till after October 15th. You leave CPAs alone till the deadline. Um, but they're very intrigued by this because of the tax advantages to it. So a couple things politically, and I do not want to talk politics, but the one thing from the far left to the far right that all of Congress agrees on is that employee ownership is a good thing.
Hmm.
Regulatory, all of it's one of the most bipartisan issues there are because it creates more business owners, it eliminates taxes, it creates retirement plans, it keeps jobs. So when you talk to third party or private equity, they never talk about post tax because they can't. There's nothing to talk about there.
Hmm.
Part of the discussion is, to your point, Marty, is us having to bring up, okay, that's fine. You got offered a 5-time multiple, but what does it mean post tax? You'd have to get a 7.5 or an 8-time multiple to equal a tax free sale, which is a 1042 exchange. It gets a little more detailed. We say it's just like a 1031, but it's 11 better. It's a little ESOP humor.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, you crazy ESOP guys.
You got to have some ESOP humor in there, Scott.
stop him.
But
Yeah. Ted, I was relying on you to control him. You know?
it's a totally different discussion because no one else can impact the taxes. And so when you start talking about selling tax free with all the proposed tax changes that are out there, when you talk about the EQ side of what people have been through, when you talk about the valuations that are out there today for these businesses, Ted, I'm going to steal your quote. Everyone always says now's the perfect time to do an ESOP. It just so happens it's true right now. They're all actually happening. This is an amazing environment for this that is really beneficial to contractors and construction companies.
Yeah. So let's start to wind down. Scott,
Yeah.
any last questions you'd like to ask? And then I'll start to
Yeah,
wrap
I,
up.
I have kind of an off the wall question, and it has to do with family transitions. Um, Marty and I always say that those tend to be the hardest ones to do, just because it's hard to tell your kid, maybe you need a little work in this and that, and or maybe that somebody else in the family's already in their mind decided how they want to do it, and so out of in the number of ESOPs that you guys set up, how often are you doing it where the leadership then becomes the son or the daughter, and how do those tend to work out?
Yeah, so there's a couple different scenarios, and I'll jump in just because my history's longer with dealing with these. Either the owner says, "By God, my son or daughter needs to own and run this company." So yet you have to kind of separate ownership from running the company. And so obviously those, transition to the child. The next one is, hey, I realize my son or daughter may be good at running this, but I don't know that. Um, so I want to diversify because a lot of times the owner's entire net worth is tied up in the company, right? So they're like, I'd really want to diversify my net worth, but I want to retain the ability to have my child run it, and that's an ESOP because they get their money off the table, they diversify it, but they retain operational control to have their son or daughter run it if they turn out to be good. So that works out well.
Hmm.
Um, and then we'll see and there's also management incentive plans, and the son or daughter is going to get stock through the ESOP. So it's kind of a win-win. That also solves a lot of family problems because one problem is if they don't do something like that, if they have people inside the company and people outside the company, there's always this question where the people
Yeah.
outside the company are like, well, where are the distributions? Give me
Yeah.
more distributions. And the people inside the company are like, hey, I'm working my rear end off to grow this company. I should get paid more. And B, we got to leave some money in the company to grow the company and keep it safe and, whatever. So you have all these fights.
Yeah.
And what an ESOP does is it puts everyone on the same side of the table to get a fair and full value. And then you can incent the person who's actually working there with stock management incentive plans, etc. For for that. So it really does help out a lot in family dynamics.
Interesting.
Mm.
So, Doug, in terms of wrapping up, what would you like us to really remember from this conversation, or anything, or maybe we didn't ask you something you want to point out? So, something you want us to remember? Obviously, laziercapital.com. People go there for all kinds of resources. You can contact these guys there, but laziercapital.com. But any last thoughts, Doug, that you'd want to make sure that we hear?
No, I think, and thank you, Marty. I think the biggest thing we always walk away with is you hear this adage all the time, but we're not a hammer looking for a nail. We're not trying to put ESOPs everywhere. We're just simply trying to make sure that people understand that there is another option, there is another structure, and it would behoove them just to simply do the due diligence and look at them side by side. If we
Yeah.
do that and it's a better fit, Ted and I had a meeting. Gentleman wanted to go to Florida, wanted all of his money, no succession. And Ted and I congratulated him. It was amazing business. We told him, enjoy Florida. You built an amazing company. Good for you. But I think one of the things we just worry is there's a lot of people who don't think there's an alternative. They're out in these small towns. They just don't know that, maybe, like to your point, they've got an advisor who doesn't understand this. So they tell them, oh, maybe I should look at it. We just feel like if they're open to the conversation and we do enough where we do the due diligence, we're not trying to do anything that doesn't make sense. So if we can talk to them and do that side by side, I think a lot of the time they're going to find that it was a really attractive structure that they should have looked a little deeper into.
Mhm.
Ted, any last comments or thoughts? Anything you want us to make sure that points that you drive home?
Yeah, I thought I'd tell you a quick story. We were actually smart enough to go back and talk to some of these contractors. We thought we knew the way they did it, but I really asked them, why did you do the ESOP? And it was interesting what we heard because we're investment bankers, so it's all about the dollars and the tax benefits and the deal, right? And when we talked to these people, they said, "Look, especially the recent ones. I went through 9/11, I went through 0809, and now we got this COVID thing, and I'm just ready to transition this thing." And then they start talking about their friend who had sold, and they're like, hey, the first 3 months were great. The guy's at the country club. He's drinking too much. He's playing golf. I love this. This is awesome. The next 3 months are pretty darn good. The next 3 months are okay. And then their friends lost, and Doug mentioned the Exit Planning Institute did a study, and 75% of people that sold to third parties profoundly regretted it. And baby boomers are very attached to their companies, and that's what they told us. Is they said, "Look, I really enjoy working with our people. I enjoy dealing with the vendors and the clients and the trade show. And when I go out in the community, I'm the president. You know, I don't want to get disconnected from all that. Maybe I want to take 4 or 8 or 12 weeks or 26 weeks of vacation, but I want to stay involved. And this allows me to do it." And the two phrases they kept mentioning over and over again were living a life of relevance or a life of significance. And it was funny that they all had those same phrases. And
Yeah.
for them, that came from seeing their people do well, their key people do well, and continuing to have a role.
Yeah. So our guests have been Ted Lape, LAPE, and Doug Janowski. They are with Lazier Capital Partners. And of course, Scott Good, my partner in Contractor Succession, has been with us. And a plug for Contractor Succession will help you get ready for some of this stuff and help move you into talking to folks like Ted and Doug to see if the ESOP is the right option. We help you help you grow your business so that it in fact is more saleable or more transferable and all those kinds of things. You can find us at contractorsuccession.com. Once again, Lazier Capital Partners. Doug and Ted, thank you so much for being part of the Contractor Succession podcast.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you for listening to the Contractor Succession Podcast. You can learn more about us at our website, contractorsuccession.com. You can also find us on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter.